How's Ghana
What?
today?
I can see Adnan. Hi, Adnan.
Hey, I'm over here.
What?
How's
Are you
Ghana
on?
today? It's raining over here, man, and it's supposed to be summer, missing the African sun.
Wow.
Uh,
What country are you now?
The Netherlands.
Netherlands. Okay.
Oh, okay. I'm seeing Ishrad. Ishrad, I think you are joining us from India.
Adnan, can you turn on your camera?
Exactly.
My
Oh,
camera is
okay,
on.
okay. Okay, good to see you.
Oh,
Good to see you.
okay.
Can you guys see me?
No, we can't.
Not.
Okay, I'm just gonna switch it off and switch it back on, and
All
hopefully.
right.
Okay, good,
Am I
good.
good?
Yes,
Yeah, we see you
you
now.
can now. You can
Great.
now. Good.
Adnan. Oh, I can see Adnan now. Hi.
Hey, I don't know what happened. I think I had another application that was hogging my camera feed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's sometimes that happens.
Okay. Daniel, okay, so maybe this time, maybe we do the attendees join in. Maybe if we can hear from them or their speciality. Daniel, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. What's your area? What's your field?
Okay, I'm somewhere far. I find myself in the .NET ecosystem. I normally do ASP.NET Core, Angular stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, mainly those two. Sometimes I switch to React, but mainly .NET, ASP.NET Core, and Angular.
Yes, Ishrad, if you can kindly give us your field of expertise.
Hi, Ernest. I didn't understand what you're asking.
No, I was saying we use this time to do a quick introduction of the attendees joining. So we network ourselves and
Oh, okay.
yes, so,
I'm Irshad from India.
yeah.
I'm joining from Dubai now.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'm working in a bank sector as a desktop support technician.
Okay.
That's wonderful. Good
And
to see you.
I'm very interested in this type of technologies, so I joined today to learn
Oh,
something new.
That's good.
yes, good to
Nice,
have
nice to
you.
hear. Thanks for
Thank
So
joining us.
Okay.
thank you.
How did you know about the event?
Yes, through Meetup, I already have an account in Meetup, so I
Okay.
came and through LinkedIn. I believe like I am joined to the group of Ghana
Okay.
because I
Okay.
attended the last session with virtual desktop something with Anup sir.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that should be last month.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Good
So
stuff.
so after that I've joined the group, so I am receiving the notification from this LinkedIn group, I think.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
Wow,
We do it
interesting.
every month.
that is
Every month we
wonderful.
do different
And
That,
thanks
technologies.
all for organizing this type of boot camps
yeah,
for
yeah.
helping others.
Thank,
Yeah.
thank you
We're
very
glad
much.
to have you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm seeing Dennis. Dennis, if you can hear me, just a quick intro about yourself and what you do. Hi, Dennis. Can you hear me? Okay. So we move to Frank. Frank, if you are there and you can hear me, you can just unmute yourself and give us here.
Yes, hello. I'm Frank. Anati. I'm with the Ghana Health Service. I'm IT
Okay.
manager, and I'm interested in the server technology because I administer Windows Server, and now administering Linux Server too. So
That's
this will
that,
be a great
that
help.
good to
Okay,
have you
thank
join us.
you. Good to be here. Okay.
I can see Manuel. Manuel, can you hear me? Okay. I can see Nathaniel. Nathaniel Siedu. If you can hear me, you can just give a brief overview of yourself and what you do, what you are good at. Okay, maybe we move to I see. I see. Nathaniel, can you hear me? Having difficulty heard me. Okay. Abu, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Anything from your side what you would like to add?
And
before we
maybe he
start?
can introduce himself, tell people what he does. How was your birthday, brother?
Yeah, it was awesome because of all of you wishing me happy birthday. I was so happy. I was feeling like a celebrity. Everybody wishing me happy birthday. I'm
Oh,
happy.
man.
It was my birthday.
I miss traveling and seeing you all over the place.
Yeah. It's true. It's true. It's true. Thank you so much for the wishes.
No problem, man.
And thank you so much for responding to our call. Anytime we call you to come and speak to our community members, and
You know
we
me,
really
man. I'm a son of the soil,
yeah,
Africa's in my blood.
yeah.
Whenever I get the call, I never say no.
I see that you've been doing the same thing for Nigerian community too. And we really,
Yeah, I was with fellow Ghanaian Samuel Erskine,
yeah,
my Nigerian brother, yesterday for
yes,
their anniversary show.
yeah,
Yeah, I saw that.
yeah. We really know that we have big brothers all over the places, and we really appreciate that. Thank you so much for that. We too, we are preparing for our 3rd-year anniversary in October.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely are most welcome there too.
Well, I'm just waiting for them to okay me to fly all over the place again, and then
Yeah, sure.
planning on doing a whole African tour.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's great. That's great. That's great. I think we'll
We're
talk
happy to hear that. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so
All right.
we are going to talk about service, eh?
Yes, we are going to talk about the formidable servers. And yes, I'll be the co-host, and Ndela will be the main host for this event. So I want to officially give the platform to Adnan. Adnan, thank you for joining us. As I do so, I think I will handle it. I would relay to the main host, which is Dela Tepu. So you will take it from there. So Dela, take it from there. Please, our entreats, if you are not talking, your mic should be muted and your video should be off. So, yes, over to you, Stella.
Thank you, Ernest. Thank you. We're happy to see you all in today's edition of the monthly meetup, Microsoft User Group Ghana. Today, we are cherished to have in our midst Adnan Hendricks and also Nicolas Zobi, who are going to give us some fine presentations on Microsoft Server and also licensing. So just a brief introduction of our guests. Adnan is a Microsoft specialist, a creative director, cloud solutions, and is a leading Azure infrastructure consultant and also a Microsoft MVP. He's also a trainer and actively involved in Microsoft TAP programs. He's implementing and architecturing solutions with focus on cloud, both public and hybrid infrastructure, and also end user computing workspace. He's also an international speaker, and because of that, he's always traveling all over the place and a trainer as well. So we are very happy to have him in our midst. So we'll leave the floor for Hendrik to kickstart the event for us.
Thank you for the intro. I'm just gonna start up and share my presentation.
Right.
Just screen so you guys can see that. And then if I just start up my
We can.
Presentation. So hopefully everybody can see my presentation out now.
Yes.
And thanks for that introduction. People can follow me on my social media or Twitter with my handle @microspecialist. or even mail me at microspecialist@hotmail.com. You know, if you have any questions or afterwards, there will be a chance for questions, but I know sometimes I'm going to give you guys a copy of the slides. It'll be recording. And if you guys have any questions, you can just let me know anytime. So my session is really about setting up hybrid identities with Azure AD, because you know, we're always starting with identities and moving to cloud, and it doesn't matter where you sort of working. In the end, you're still going to be working on Microsoft technologies or Windows Server or specific operating systems. And the main idea why we use computers or applications, you know, computers, is because we use applications. And sometimes these applications are either installed locally on your computer, or you're accessing it through a website, or it's a SaaS application, etc. So the main reason why we use computers and how we have access, or my session is about getting access to those applications, especially now when we're living in this hybrid cloud world, because I know everybody's using Teams and can get access to these kind of nice applications. For example, I'm sitting in my room because of, you know, the whole pandemic situation. Wouldn't be able to travel this past year, but because of technology, I haven't left this room for the past year we have been working in, and yet I was able to still present and talk to wonderful people all over the world, and especially today with you guys in Ghana. So my agenda for today that I've mapped out is really just about talking about the current state of identities and why we need to be more focused on that, you know, when it comes to security, and also that is the focal point of where you start. I do a lot of IT projects, and I know that a lot of people try to implement software when they're looking at more from a technical aspect. My point of view is always to look at the identity or job role perspective. So what is the person going to do? What does he need from IT to do his job right? So everything is very personal when it comes to a specific identity or person. And so that's very vital or important. And then I'm going to be talking about things that we all understand, and how things like authentication and authorization works, looking at Active Directory in detail. I know all of you have Active Directory accounts wherever you're working at, and then looking at how you can actually move that identity or use it in a cloud hybrid environment. So we're going to look at how things like Azure AD Connect works, Azure AD Cloud Sync, and also some next steps and resources to keep you guys busy. So I've already started off by mentioning that identity should be your focus point, no matter what kind of infrastructure that you're trying to provide, or type of application landscape you're trying to achieve. So identity is the control plane, and by focusing and controlling the identity, you can leverage security and also access to applications, and also how that identity, because think about it in this way, right? A person has maybe one account, and on that account, he can work on multiple different kinds of devices. So you could maybe have a mobile device, a tablet, a computer. At the same time, you can maybe sign on to a Windows server. And yet with every new interface, you know, you get a specific application or operating system landscape tied into that device, but yet we can still utilize that same identity and have access to, you know, the applications for that specific device, or based in the cloud. So we're going to be looking at how we can, within these different ecosystems, make it easier to port that to Azure. So by starting off, we always talk about authentication and authorization. So authentication is really the process of verifying a user's identity on a network. So authentication means you are who you say you are. So there's always like two components, and this is when we work with on a local network, an Active Directory. There's an interactive logon. So you're typing in your username and your password, and then the network authentication happens and you are authenticated onto the network. So you have, let's say, the right to log on. So a good analogy to use for authentication is kind of like your identity, like a passport or identity ID, that really proves who you are. For example, your driver's license could also be an identification or passport or ID document. So some of the ways that you can also do these things is like by a username, password, or things like smart cards. And also, when we look at passwordless, moving to FIDO keys and those sort of things that also deal with extra factors like biometric information. So then we get to authorization. So authorization is really, once you've been authenticated, authorization is kind of like the list that says these are the things that you have access to as yourself. So when we look at different kinds of authorizations, for example, things like security principles that are created, user accounts are issued with a security token. So you get the token, and in the token is all the list of user groups. And these user groups have access to different resources within your networks or file access on file servers, etc. So authorization is always what the thing that you have access to. So when working on, let's say, on-premises, Active Directory domain services, which is provided through Windows Server. In fact, I'm already using one of the newer Server 2022 on my one of my demo servers that I've set up. So we've always needed to deploy Active Directory domain services as like a centralized system to manage users, computers, and other resources on our computer network. So some of the features that is included or that it provides is like a centralized directory. So where all the accounts are, um, specific organizational units. It provides single sign-on access, so you can sign on to computers, servers, and provides integrated security through the groups and also the policies that apply to your account, your computer, etc. And it has a specific management interface that you can go and add new accounts, etc., and create new security groups and those sort of things. So one of the major things is that centralized network management and security that provides. So a single location, and depending on the number of domain controllers or how your network is set up, you can synchronize within your network or across wide area networks with other domain controllers, etc. And have all those group policies and security policies apply to your users and computers to fine-tune the things like settings and security settings across your environment. So those are all the stuff that we know that we've had, and it hasn't really changed in a number of years. So we've always needed a specific Active Directory account. But now moving towards working in cloud, more towards cloud, we need a cloud directory. So Azure Active Directory has about more than 200,000 premium organizations. It's the world's largest cloud identity service. So looking at these numbers are quite huge. It's really the leader in the field when it comes to identities. And, monthly active users are, I think the number is closer to 400 million by now. And on daily authentication requests, people signing on and being authenticated to Azure AD has over 30 billion per day authentications. So what can that provide that, Active Directory doesn't? So with Azure Active Directory, you can have modern access. So this is where we can go towards things that use more cloud applications and cloud security. So we can use things like automated user lifecycle management, provide self-service for our end users. If you just look at things that you are using for your social media accounts, things like Facebook, LinkedIn, even Meetup, if you forget your password, there's an easy way you can just reset it yourself. You don't have to phone the help desk. You don't have to open up a call logging system and wait. It's immediate, right? So you immediately get a challenge to your email or sometimes your mobile phone. You prove who you are through some means, and you can change that password. So you get a link. So with Azure AD, we can do that much easier than what Active Directory could give us. Also, the security is a lot better. So we can have stronger authentication. And instead of just having things like security groups that say where we can have access to or what our security conditions are, we can create things like conditional access. So based on not just our security groups, but also specific items of our own identity. For example, what kind of role you have in the organization, etc., where you work, where you are based, so your work location, and those sort of things. And then there's the extra cloud security, things like identity protection, privileged identity management, and identity governance that are extra cloud-based security options that allow you to monitor things like interactive logins, sign-ins, and if ever there's a sign-in that's deemed to be a security risk, it can automatically be blocked. So those are some of the, advantages of having or moving towards a hybrid environment, for example, like with Azure Active Directory, instead of just using Active Directory alone. So that end user experience and also the security. And then as well, when collaborating with other companies, you can have guest users in your tenant or Azure AD. You can also collaborate with other businesses, etc. And because these things are all developed using open standards, application integration. So just to look at the different forms of Azure AD that you can get is you have free version. So it's really pretty basic, but you can have up to 500,000 objects, basic, premium, and then you have extra special ones. For example, if you just sign up with Office 365 and access to applications. So for my environment, I've just set up a free tenant for Azure AD. And then premium is really where you get the most features and functionality with advanced reporting, and also a lot of automation on security items and single sign-on. So this is really the current state of work when you look at working with on-premises identities that are giving you access to company resources on your network. But let's say your company needs to implement Office 365 or a different cloud-based application. or even collaborate with another company. Because remember, if you guys think about in the past how you had to have all these pretty complicated methods, especially when companies were fusing, then you had to make sure that, first of all, the network is connected through a telecoms provider. And then you had to make sure that you had to go and create, forest trusts. And sometimes those kind of things were quite complicated to set up. With Azure Active Directory, we can seamlessly integrate different organizations into a single tenant, so a single Azure AD. And that's one of the demo environments that I've set up so you guys can see how that look like. So this is basically the start when looking at identity provisioning. So we're going to need to make sure that all our on-premises identities are provisioned into Azure AD. And for example, if there's another domain that we also need to provision, let's say a company fusion, that we need to provision both of these environments. One of the ways in which you can provision is using the Azure AD Connect sync tool. So it's basically a little tool that you install on one of your servers, and it has read access to an on-premises Active Directory. So based on the organizational unit or security group or things that you set up, you can specify specific accounts to be provisioned to Azure Active Directory. And that will give the user in the organization access to cloud applications. So one of the reasons why we actually need a different account is based on the protocols that on-premises works versus cloud-based applications. If you look at things like Active Directory works with Kerberos tickets and LDAP, so it's a different protocol or type of communication than OAuth or cloud-based applications. And the reason being is that the token set up with Active Directory is based off your security groups and have a specific size. So it's basically just set with the properties of who you are and what you have access to. With cloud-based tokens for Azure Active Directory, we can specify more information. So it's based off using things like claims. So there's extended properties that's in the token, which is not just your who you are and the security groups you belong to, but also all those different attributes that we can utilize for conditional access. So based on things like, for example, you are a manager as a role, and you're only supposed to have access to things in, like, let's say, Accra, Ghana, but you are a specific level manager. So based on all those properties, we can create a if then else scenario with conditional access. So whereby you can get access. So even though other managers might be blocked for something specific, but because your location is Accra, Ghana, you will have access to that resource. So ideally, how we're looking at the sync tool again is that we have that Active Directory Connect linked up with Active Directory, and we'll go and provision through PowerShell and specific REST to Azure AD, giving you access to that. So there are different kinds of authentication methods with Azure AD that we're going to be looking at. So you get cloud-based authentication where it's cloud only. So you can provision, like let's say you're going to do a on-premises to cloud migration. So you can migrate to cloud, provision to cloud, and have it set to cloud only. So the authentication will happen in the cloud. You can have password hash sync and provide seamless single sign-on. So where you can have the authentication that it will send the hash. So the same username and password without really sending the password. And then you have a third option, which is pass-through authentication, where it uses a simple password validation feature by a lightweight services agent to provide that single sign-on. So the person is authenticated with the same identity and password. When looking at federation, uses Active Directory federation services, and that's more of a outdated method of providing authentication for single sign-on, and most people look at it as a form of legacy because we have all these different cloud-based authentication options. So just by looking at some of these pictures, we can see that creating a hybrid identity with password sync. So you're basically just syncing the identity with the password hashes, and the authentication is really done in Azure AD. User getting access to cloud-based resources and having a hybrid identity with pass-through authentication. As you can see from the diagram, in the cloud, the user will sign in. He is sent through to the pass-through authentication agent, and the authentication has been done through Active Directory. So with the sync from Active Directory, it is synced through Azure AD Connect. Utilizing federation. So generally this used to provide an extra level of security between external users that are trying to access company resources or cloud-based resources. User signing into Azure AD will be redirected to the on-premises network through a proxy, where it will be validated directly with Active Directory or the authentication process through those federation servers. And this handy chart really steps you through what the options are based on which authentication methods is either allowed or available. So if you want Azure AD to handle the signing completely in the cloud, yes or no, you will then either ask yourself, do you want to enforce user-based or user-level Active Directory security policies during sign-in? If you don't want to enforce anything, you can sign in not natively supported, or you want those options. So as you can see, depending on if you do have sign-in requirements and disaster recovery and leaked accounts, you have all these different options to choose password hash sync with seamless, a single sign-on, or the pass-through authentication. So one of the questions I often get asked is, why choose authentication over federated authentication? So you need less on-premises infrastructure with cloud-based, and you get a good experience. So you can do things like password hash sync, where Azure AD Connect, the utility, does that, or the pass-through authentication agent, or you can have a seamless sign-on. You can do modern authentication, and you can have with Windows 10 hybrid Azure AD join and those sort of things. So some of you, if you've ever logged in with a Microsoft account, your Microsoft account onto Windows 10, that's really what hybrid Azure AD join gives you with that default Microsoft account identity. And also things like smart lockout and those security features that we can set. So looking at the tool that provides that, to simplify things, I've put in some screenshots. So it's basically just a tool that you install. You download it from Microsoft through the Azure AD portal, and you can have different versions of this Azure AD Connect tool. So the first thing is, once you've downloaded it, you will just install it on any small server. You don't really install it on your domain controller, but for the simplification of my environment, my demo environment, I installed everything on the domain controller that I had set up. So you have two options. You have custom and express settings. So custom is where you have specific settings that you want to set or create or set up with Azure AD Connect Sync. But for most people, Express settings will set up the connection between your Active Directory domain controller and your Azure AD, Azure Active Directory. So you can do specific configuration items or options during the installation. You basically just need the global administrator account from your Azure AD tenant and also a domain account. Did somebody ask a question? Okay, so some of the required accounts or components is really the global administrator for your Azure AD tenant and also a service account or account that can read your Active Directory domain, information. So when users sign in, this is where you can specify the authentication type. So authentication type for this chance can be password hash synchronization, which is normally the preferred one. You can also have pass-through authentication or federation, etc., etc. So that brings me straight to my demo. So I'm just going to exit and step over to my environment over here. So as you can see, this is my Azure Active Directory dashboard. So I'm using a Azure AD free license. So it's nothing fancy, it's just the free version. I have a number of users. That's some of them have already been synced, so to save time, I've set up the sync and everything. And there's some that are cloud-only accounts. So these are my global administrator accounts. I have some things from on-premises that were synced and a couple of users that been synced as well. So going back to my option, so generally I would go to Azure AD Connect. So this is where if you would go to have that provisioning set up. And to get that, looking at this overview page, I can see some information. So you guys can already see that I have Azure AD Connect Sync. My status is already enabled. And less than an hour ago was the first sync that already happened. And I've got password hash sync. And then some extra options and things that I can go to. So the first time when you do it, you can you have a link to set it up, and you can download that from here. It will bring up the Microsoft download page, and then you just download it and install it within your environment. So I'm going to go to my Windows server where I have it installed. So I've already have my Azure AD Connect set up. And I can open it up. Again, I'm running Windows Server 22. I can go to configuration. I can look at some of my options that I have. So I've already synchronized my directory, my local directory, my domain, Skynet.local. I have specific options. I'm using a SQL Server database for the information, and these items I can export it. I can also update, change different information, refresh information, troubleshoot. I can customize my synchronization options, etc. So this is where I can go and specify things like my global administrator for Azure. I can connect it to my domain. I specify which domain or OU to set up. I'm just going to exit this and go to my Active Directory users and computers. So I've actually set up a bunch of sample users. And the OU that I've set up to synchronize was my domain cloud users. So these users have already been provisioned to my, if I go back to my users, to my Active Directory. So that was these two. And if I go back there, so generally, you know, you can specify the domain, you can specify which OU, and typically, depending on how you're planning on migrating either your existing users to the cloud, you could either do it this way or you could just specify all your users. Now, one of the things, if you're going to Office 365 or cloud, you're dealing with a lot of licenses. So I'm just going to move a few to this OU, and over time you'll see that those will be provisioned to my cloud tenant. So there's basically just a service running that will check every half an hour or couple of minutes if there are any new identities that need to be provisioned in the cloud, in my Azure tenant, in Active Directory, and it will go and look into my domain cloud users. So one of the reasons why I always feel that it's better doing it this way, there are ways where you can just add a specific attribute that you can go and look at. So users with a specific attribute where you could say Office 365, yes, or cloud user, yes or no, as an attribute on that identity in your Active Directory. Those are good and well, but sometimes you have specific migration methods or options where you have, remember, one of the main things of dealing with security and with customizations on premises in Active Directory is group policy. So normally you have specific group policies that's targeting this organizational unit. And for cloud users, they won't, think about people that are working with fixed machines versus laptops or specific devices. So you don't want them to have the same policies being applied based on their devices or even their job role. Because remember, some people might have more flexibility using a laptop. For example, you're working offline, you might need to have local admin rights or extra rights to do something on the laptop because they are away from offices or uh, landline locations, working through internet, etc. So that's the one method. So we're gonna be going back to my session, and then we'll check up on those identities if they have been synced. So some of the so normally you have things like human resources or service desk or those sort of things that are really just entering information into human resource applications, and that will feed into Active Directory, and then Azure AD Connect will then sync it to Azure AD so people have access to the cloud applications like Office 365 or Azure or other SaaS or infrastructure as a service. So when looking at pass-through authentication, normally you can only have like one agent installed that takes over the provisioning. This is a way we can have a second pass-through authenticator connector through Azure AD Connect. So it's a specific process, and this is mainly for those large environments where people want to have like high availability. Because remember, if this pass-through authentication doesn't work, then people don't get authenticated with their Active Directory locally. So this is one of the ways that you can, through command prompt running the installer with registering another server or agent as a connector. So you guys will be getting all these slides. I've placed everything on a PDF format, and the film will be recorded. So setting up Azure AD Connect, you have it running on a different machine. You can have Azure AD Connect Health, which really just does an overall check on the state of your sync engine to make sure that sometimes troubleshooting, the sync might not be working, or some sort of network problem is preventing the sync from provisioning your Active Directory accounts to the cloud. So with the second option of providing, or the modern option with providing, is Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync. So we've looked at Azure AD Connect as the application, which is really just a simple sync tool that runs from your Active Directory. With Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync, we have a way of providing a light agent on the environment, the Active Directory environment, and having it provisioned or managed from the cloud. So the other way around. So the way Azure AD Connect cloud provisioning works is that you have that agent or connector installed, and you manage it through Azure Active Directory instead of where the management is done through the Azure AD Connect tool. So this is more looking at things where mergers, acquisitions, where the network or directory is disconnected from things like primary company, or there are specific scenarios that prevent using Azure AD Connect, for example. So some of the benefits is that you don't need a lot of infrastructure. It's pretty easy. It's basically just downloading an agent and then just running that on a machine. And there's three or specific scenarios that really cater to utilizing the cloud sync. So you can have a single forest with a single Azure AD tenant, so your on-premises, or you can have existing forests and new forests that you can sync, because it's really just the agent. It doesn't really look at the infrastructure. It just looks at where you specify you need these accounts, and it just pulls it in, and you can have sync from multiple existing sync clients already. So you can use it with Azure AD Connect that's maybe installed, and for some reason you might want to have another domain within the same existing forest, and sync those accounts. And this is really an easier method, I believe, than Azure AD Connect. So it's some of the requirements. You need a hybrid identity administrator in your Azure AD tenant or enterprise or domain admin to install and create Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync group managed service account. And it supports from 2012 R2 running .NET 4.7. And then, of course, you need to modify or think about on-premises firewalls that might block communication to Azure AD. So looking at the installation, just to show you, I've screenshotted the installations for speeding up. So you download the Azure AD Connect provisioning agent from Azure AD, and really just start off by entering in your first being authenticated with Azure. That's a screenshot that I don't have. And then you get to where you have to configure a service account. So you can either use a pre-existing group managed service account, or you can have the installer create one with the domain admins credentials that you use. Then it will just connect to the domain. You can also configure, specify specific domains if you have multiple, and it will just go and register the agent with the Azure AD. So with the registration, Azure Active Directory will know that domain is linked with my Azure tenant. So now the administrator in my Azure tenant, or somebody that has a specific access authorization to do the process, can perform the cloud sync. And you can quite often think that, remember, what large organizations quite often have is you have somebody in charge of the local Active Directory maybe, and especially when it comes to mergers and acquisitions and takeover of companies, merging of companies, you have quite often that problem where this team does that and this team only does Azure AD, and they don't want anybody else to have access to their environments. So this way, the Azure AD people can specify just what they need to have and how to get it there. Otherwise, they would need local administrator approval and installation of the Azure AD setup. So I'm just going to take you back to my demo environment and show you the tool. I first want to go to Azure AD. So within Azure Active Directory, the second option that I have to provision my environment is the Azure AD Cloud Sync. So I can go to Manage Azure AD Cloud Sync, and the first option that I have, normally when you go in, you will have to go and download an agent. You accept the terms, and then it will start downloading automatically. That is connected to your tenant. So I've already installed it on my domain controller in my other environment. And once installed, I've run the provisioning wizard. So here you can see that I have a number of users, and I have cloud user that's already been provisioned. So I have a configuration. That's the first thing that you do. With logs, you can get some logging information, so you can see which ones have been updated, success, failures, and I can go and see what the problem or options were. Going back to my configuration. So this is where I can also enforce my synchronization from the cloud. I just want to go back to my Active Directory. So this is my OU that I'm using. I'm just going to move a bunch of these users to my cloud account. And then I can go and say, well, restart the sync. So it's going to go and enforce the sync on my local environment to provision those users in my Azure AD tenant. So as you can see, it happens almost instantaneously in this way. It's adding see. Users. And you can see that the properties of the directory sync status is yes. This one. And once these users are connected, they can just sign in into any cloud environment. For example, if I go to my apps, Microsoft portal for my apps, I just want to sign in with a different account. Let's say Jack. Oh, typing these things incorrectly. I immediately have access to, like, let's say, cloud applications or the environment. If this was Office 365, you know, or cloud applications. So these are the way I can make access to cloud-based. You'll see that over time, this as I refresh, extra users will be coming in, and some of these are based on the Azure AD Connect that's also been synced. And over time, it will just go and sync. And looking at my options with Azure AD Connect, I can have a look and see when my last sync and if there's any problems. Oh, okay, so there seems to be a problem that I have. So one of the things that you can do with the Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync option within your configuration, is there a way that you can match? Let's say you have an existing synced attribute or option. So this is where you can set up how you want to sync from the utilizing Cloud Sync. So organizational scope. So what I've specified, cloud users as my organization, and then you can also have managed attributes and mappings. And I think this is where some of the things that have gone wrong. I'm just gonna restore default mappings. Go back and restart the sync. So we can go and check up on those. So these are some of my Azure AD Connect sync options, and these will be refreshed with the extra cloud-based sync in a minute. So going back to my session, to the slides. So these are the three ways in which you can go and provision Active Directory user accounts with Azure AD. So getting them to be created in Azure AD. There's the Identity Manager. What used to be Microsoft Identity Manager, but we mainly use Azure AD Connect Sync and Azure AD Connect Cloud Provisioning or Cloud Sync. So the next steps, or one of the things that you have to look at when doing this, is really to turn on password hashing for whichever authentication you choose. And the reason being is, depending on the type of, let's say you have Azure Premium, then you have high availability, disaster recovery, and also prevention for on-premises outage survival. You know, like if you have an on-premises outage, you can't have access to on-premises. With a hashing, you can get authenticated in the cloud. And also with identity protection. With identity protection, Microsoft has quite often what they call a collection of identities and password dumps that have been discovered on the internet or dark web, where identities and passwords. So if Microsoft does discover identity and password of one of your identities, and you have password sync enabled, it can go and protect those accounts. And option is to migrate to cloud authentication. You can do one time or gradually. And for next steps, some of the resources that you guys will be left is where you can go and find out which authentication methods you should use, some options for migrating, like migration guides, deployment plans, and also especially dealing with the identity framework for security and security white papers. That's pretty much my session. If you guys have any questions, we can move to Q&A.
Okay, so I have a question. In all this, how is roaming handled? Let's say if the users are on roaming, I want to see how it is going to be handled.
Well, depending on if you want enterprise roaming, you know that some features, and this is something that you can also try with a Microsoft account. Like let's say you have Windows 10 and you have it set up. When moving towards things like a cloud type of environment, you can't really expect to have everything that the person has, because remember, roaming and those sort of things is set by group policy in on-premises environments. And in the cloud, you basically only need to have minimal policy changes. For example, you'd go and use things like Endpoint Protection Manager or Intune, for example, that has cloud-based policies. And utilizing different devices, you know, so just because the person is using a cloud identity doesn't mean he's also going to be using a computer. So then based on the device, you'll get different, like let's say policies based on that device. And that will entail what the roaming state is based on. So with a mobile phone, for example, you won't get the same computer environment. And that's really what we're trying to achieve. You know, we want to make it available so that people can get access to the applications and that they can work. You know, there's still going to be situations where they're getting a specific device like a computer or a workstation from their company. And when they sign in, it needs to be secured. But we have so many different ways in which we can, you know, enhance security and security settings through privileged identity management and secure workstations, which are kind of like lockdown machines. And sometimes you don't want to create a roaming state, because remember, if somebody needs a specific type of, let's say, desktop, they can go and utilize Azure Virtual Desktop, where they can still have the same experience, have the same applications, and use it off different devices, no matter whether they're using a tablet, a computer, etc. But you can have enterprise state roaming through Azure AD. It's just one of the options where it will move minimal things like background and those sort of things. Remember, if you're going to be utilizing a laptop or a cloud-based, you might be working off network, so you won't have access to things like file servers. So mappings in that case is irrelevant. In those kind of environments, you do need VPN and set up VPN to company infrastructure so you can get access to those network locations. But try it out. Try to sign in with your Microsoft account on a Windows 10 computer and utilize, change things like backgrounds and those sort of thing, and try and log on to another machine with the same, and you'll see that some of these settings will be wronged. But you have to really try to get off the traditional way of thinking about still having everything or keeping everything the same, because you can have different, more fluid environments. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay.
A lot of the information can also be found on the documentation from Microsoft, so docs.microsoft.com.
Okay. All right.
Where it goes into more detail about everything.
Okay. So, team, if you should have any question, you can unmute yourself, and Adnan is here to answer your questions. So, let's hear from you. This is the Q&A section. If you have any question, please unmute yourself and let's hear you.
Yeah, just there's a hand function. I'm just stopping the sharing, but I'm still here to answer questions.
Okay. All right. Della, are you there? Any questions from your end?
So Adnan, how do you merge the Azure AD with on-prem AD? How does the two work together?
Well, you basically manage Active Directory, I'd say. Most of the times with Azure AD, you managing that through the Azure portal or the Azure AD admin center, and the Active Directory information that's generally leading. Now, there is a way in which you can go and have things like, let's say somebody's working cloud-based, more cloud-based, so they don't want to change their password while they're trying to access a cloud-based application or something. Through that myapps.microsoft.com, you have the ability to do that. And if a user uses that method, we can create things like password write back, where if the guy changes it by utilizing the cloud, it will get written back to Active Directory. But ideally, things like specific settings, it's working from a one-way synchronization option. That's always from using Active Directory domain as the source of truth. So that information will get synced to the cloud. And once it's in the cloud, we can add it to extra cloud-based security groups and cloud-based policies. Now, unfortunately, in this environment, I have a basic version of Azure AD, because it's really just to show the different sync options and what is available. But with the extra, how can you say, the extra premium edition, I could have gone and show you the things like conditional access and all the cloud-based policies that you can enforce utilizing this. Oh, also, one thing I didn't show you is, let me just reshare my option. Just reshare and show you guys back with my users. I don't think we've seen the ones that were synced using the Azure Cloud Sync. So you can see that things like this account was synced using Azure AD Cloud Sync from my different Contoso domain. And you can see that the user principal name is the same UPN as my Azure AD Connect, even though they're from different domains. So in my, to just show you again, for example, I have a Contoso domain. So this is Contoso. So contoso.local. And I had Lisa, Bart, Bob, Maggie. So if we go back to the cloud and look at specific users, we can see Bob, we can see Lisa, we can see Maggie, Marge, and Mo. They're all from my Contoso domain. And the other accounts that are also synced are synced from another domain. So this is ideally what you want when you're migrating, like let's say different companies to one Azure AD, and they can have the same UPN, like domain name, in the cloud and still be separate entities. So if I show you my server 2022 domain is called skynet.local, and then I moved Jack, Mary, Joe, Mike, Sam, and Sue. So these names you've seen in my Azure AD, and some of the properties, you know, domain users, profiles, if you normally set that in Skynet. But in my Azure AD tenant, they can all have the same. So like think about the scenario. You have two different companies. They try to merge or migrate into one company. And this is the easiest and best way in which you can do that so that everybody is in the same Azure Active Directory immediately, for example, have access to Office 365 and those sort of things. If I have those licenses, I can just go and assign these, for example, in Azure AD, you have the licenses, and this is where I'd be able to, you know, sign and also create things like self sign up for my users. So they can just so if I were to give, like, let's say some of my users, I can just assign, select a user, or all of my users, and give them an Office account so that when somebody signs into that My Apps, I'm just going to select, let's say, this item, select. Yeah, I can specify what they shouldn't get, or I can just leave it on. So assigning to 3, and I have 25, and I'll just go and assign. So immediately to, okay, the sum hasn't been, let me just try. This is the same. And let me just sign out. Okay, it immediately picked up the license, and it immediately gave him access to the Office 365 applications, as you can see. So I didn't even need to sign out and sign back in. So that's one of the nice things about having things like my applications for Microsoft.com. And you know, with Office 365, my end users can also go and install it onto their machines and those sort of stuff. And this is where we can create things like with people, if we have things like self-service password reset. So through things like the account option, and this person has much more options For example, his password. We can reset his password, you know, or self-service password reset. You can do change security information. So basically, we can provide the same information to our end users in company through Azure AD and all these different options that we're getting from, like, let's say, better than things like LinkedIn and Twitter, social media and websites. So we can provide that to our end users. So in the end, with all the self-service options that we can do with Azure AD, you don't really need a heavy built help desk anymore. And this is also why a lot of, like, let's say a lot of you guys are working on in those sort of environments. Think about how technology has changed the way we work and also the requirements. So if we can have more end users doing a lot of the help desk stuff that help desk used to do, we won't need that much help desk people in the future. And it's also with the way we're moving with technology, with artificial intelligence and bots and things where it's really just a computer program that is following up on what the end user's input is, and the program decides what needs to be done. The same way the cloud-based security works, where Microsoft's artificial intelligence will look at all these 30 billion authentications and decide, and will just know which ones are valid and invalid. For example, I'm working in the Netherlands with an Azure AD account. I can sign in from any location in the world because it's cloud-based. But the Azure AD security identity protection will look at my account and see, hey, I'm not used to maybe signing in Ghana, or while I'm working, signed in here in the Netherlands, my account is trying to be accessed in Ghana, for example, or in another part of the world, and it will immediately block those instances. And that's the power that we're getting with Azure AD and being in, or at least moving towards more cloud environments.
Okay, I think Manuel has a question. Manuel, kindly ask your question.
You can unmute yourself.
Yes, so Manuel, unmute yourself and then ask your question. Yeah, Manuel, can you hear me?
Somebody's just waking up. I heard the cock crow in the background.
Yeah, Manuel, come again.
Okay, so my question is,
Hmm?
I have on-premises AD
Mm-hmm.
and then a cloud AD as well, Azure AD. But then the issue is, I have some users who has email addresses in Azure AD and then a different account also in on-premises AD. So it's been like a duplicate of each user. I don't know, is there a way that I can merge each user?
Can you just repeat that?
Okay, so I said I have on-premises AD and then Azure AD. So in the Azure AD, I have each user with a corporate domain, and then on the on-premises domain is not registered. So after installing AD Connect with a hybrid join, I now have issue where I have duplicated users. So is there a way that I can merge them or something?
Yes, you could. I mean, if you look at the last method that I showed, if you use the Azure AD Connect or also the Cloud Sync option, you'd be able to match them up. Also, you'd be able to use Azure AD Connect Sync as well to match them up. But the important part is, like I've just shown you basically quick in the demo how you can do that. But ideally, you generally have a let's say a specific domain name on premises, and sometimes your cloud-based domain name, you ideally want to have the same name or at least be owner of that name. So you can have that domain registered with Azure AD, and that just makes it a lot simpler than, for example, the way I showed you. For this is just for tests, like when you're doing training or course to learn how to do it, you can set it up this way. But ideally in the real world, when you're working for a company, you're gonna set up that domain in Azure AD as a valid domain name, so people get the same UPNs. So if it's like let's say first name dot last name at contoso.com, that contoso.com will also be registered in Azure AD for that company, like whatever the company's name is with that domain, so that the Azure AD is also created with the exact same name. So that's ideally how you would do that. So I hope that answers your question. And if you want me to just quickly show you. So ideally in Azure AD, we have the option for custom domain names. And I'd have to be, I can add my own name, the one you own, through this option. But in order to do that, you must be the owner of it. Otherwise, you're going to end up with different naming conventions. And then at the user ID, you will go and specify which account or UPN, like user principal, is the one that should be used. So this you will go and you can edit and specify that they only need to use those, which ones with the domain, but you have to be the owner of the domain. And that you do over here with custom domain names. This is my, you will then have as, the references for your primary. So you can have, like, let's say my company was skynet.com. So this is always the default domain name that you get when you just, setting it up. And then you still have to add your custom domain name, the one you own, the one that's the same as your company. And when you do that, and your custom domain name is your primary, like let's say my company's name is skynet.com, and everybody always had skynet.com, and I'm trying to create cloud-based accounts with Azure AD and Azure AD Connect or Cloud Sync so that they can use access to Office 365, pretty much like I've shown you. I would have to add skynet.com as my custom domain name and point it to the DNS service wherever that's registered. So like your hosting provider or something like that. And then once I have that, then I can have my email coming through Office 365, through Exchange Online, or, do those sort of things. So I hope that works, but you have to add it in this screen with custom domain name. And then once you have that, that's pretty much the neat way of having it the same.
All right. Any question from the panel?
Like I said, if you have any questions, you can always, reach out at Microspecialist through LinkedIn, Adnan Hendricks, or my social media, or just send me an email, and I can send you guys the the PDF, or I'll actually send it to Della, to the organizers, and then you guys can pick it up from there for the links and everything.
All right, Della, over to you.
All right, Adnan, thank you very much for that insightful session. We are really
thanks
grateful
for having me.
Yes. So we'll share your social media handles on our LinkedIn page, also on our Twitter handle, so that others can reach out to you.
Thank you.
All right.
And anytime you need a session or something, just let me know.
All right, sure thing. We'll do that. We'll keep in touch. So at this point, we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll continue with licensing with Nicholas. We can use this opportunity to connect with each other, to have a little chit chat before that session begins.